Hello and welcome to the Gwent Report, which I started with quite some volume at that point. If you thought the opening shows of this programme started with a nice gentle tune, we've just changed that a little bit, haven't we? I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Jane Dodds, the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats today.
Hello there, hi.
So let's jump straight into it. I watched a few bits of the recent UK Lib Dem conference, and there was a theme that sort of seemed to still be lingering a little bit with the Liberal Democrats, and that's a sort of response to their period in coalition. I mean, Vince Cable noted his regret about austerity. Joe Swinson said that negotiating with the Conservatives meant compromise, and some of those compromises sucked. I like the choice of wording perhaps there, getting straight to the point. Are the Lib Dems as a whole proud or ashamed of their time in government at the UK level?
I think that's a really important question, and it can only be answered, obviously, as we look back. I think there were some things we should be incredibly proud of, and I think there are some things that we should say that we should have been much, much stronger in saying we're not going along with this, and to be very clear with our Conservative partners that if things didn't change, we were going to pull out. And the biggest one for me was the one highlighted, as you mentioned, which was austerity. We seemed to go along with it, and we really should have said, no, we're not willing to be part of this, and should have said we're actually not going to go along with the coalition had we realised the huge, massive impact that the austerity measures were going to have. So, I think it was a mixture. Looking back, hindsight's a brilliant thing, of course. Looking back, we can have regrets, but we can be proud of a lot of things as well. And some things that we can take into Wales, like the pupil premium, income tax thresholds going up, the green agenda being on the agenda, being very clear that that's something that we were very proud of. So I think there's some things, there's a mixture of things.
It strikes me as still a little bit peculiar for a party which aspired to be in government for if we link the Liberal Democrats back to the original Liberal Party, then we could talk about the time in which they were not in power, or if we look at the Lib Dems from their formation, to 2 years afterwards, still feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. It feels, if you're asking the voter out there to trust the Lib Dems in whichever election it is that comes up to put them in positions of power, it seems that little bit difficult. I don't see that element of concern, particularly about what happened in the past, coming from Labour or the Conservatives in the way that it still seems to be from the Lib Dems. Do you think there's a need for a bolder response to those coalition periods?
I'm not sure, actually. I always think politics is about humility and about a recognition that we can't always be right in everything. I've challenged Labour, I've challenged Conservatives, I've challenged Plaid Cymru on some of the things that I think they would acknowledge in hindsight was pretty abhorrent. And they've always been very defensive and have always found ways of not responding. I don't think we should ever do that. So in terms of trust of our party, we've got a lot to build on. We've got a long way to go. And of course, our biggest trust issue was that we broke a pledge on tuition fees. And many people will not and have not forgotten that. And very many people were ashamed that we went into coalition with what is a right-wing party. So we have a lot to do to build up that trust, and I'm not complacent about that. We have to reach out and talk about what we're going to do and our offer to the Welsh people, and to build a better society, and to be clear what we can and what we can't do.
I want to pick up on something you said there, because obviously, my initial question was about Westminster. We also have an in-effect coalition in Wales at the moment, with Kirsty Williams as a member of the Welsh Government. From the experience of coalitions both at Westminster and in the Senedd, what's your approach to coalition working, and are there any parties you'd rule out working with?
Brilliant question. So I'd absolutely rule out working with UKIP. no way would I be seen with a right-wing party who holds such xenophobic and racist views. I think the experience of the Welsh Government in terms of coalitions, rainbow coalitions, working together has been much more different to that of Parliament. In my lifetime, the Liberal Conservative coalition in 2010 was the first, and it was something that in hindsight we should have worked much longer at the beginning of it, in my view. The whole process from the election to the coalition agreement being announced publicly was around 4 days. And if we look at some of the periods of time that other countries have taken to build up coalition agreements, we perhaps could have learnt from that and could have stepped back and said we're going to take longer and people are going to need to wait. In terms of the Welsh Assembly, we've had parties working with other parties over a much, much longer period of time. Labour have reached out to other people to be part of the government and the cabinet secretary roles. And they are much more used to it, and I think the Welsh people are much more used to it as well. With Kirsty Williams in the role she's in, a key role in education, in actually the future of Wales, with working with our young people and our children. And we're really proud of everything she's done and is doing and will continue to do. We support her. And don't forget, it's not just about education. We've got the progressive agreement as well. And I like the title of that. And we should have thought about that when we went into coalition with the Conservatives. What's progressive? What can we actually look in terms of a vision and a future? So our progressive agreement in the Senedd includes housing, includes mental health, and includes a range of topics, not just education.
You've ruled out UKIP. You've obviously expressed concern about the experience working with the Conservatives at Westminster. Would you be open-minded to working in a coalition in the Assembly with the Conservatives?
Personally, no. I would not be seeing us working with the Conservatives. I think that they have an agenda now and probably going into the future of continuing with austerity and continuing with the social injustices in our communities. So I would not see us working with the Conservatives. I'll own my politics very upfront. I'm left-wing. I was a member of the Labour Party. I then left the Labour Party over the Iraq War. I spent a long time in the wilderness, not doing anything with politics, and then came back to the Liberal Democrats. So I'm very much of a left-wing nature, and so that might tell you a little bit about the reasons why I wouldn't go in with the Conservatives. I have to say, ultimately, though, we always have to think about what's best for the country and what's best for our local communities. So, for example, in the county that I live in Powys, we've just started work with a Green councillor who's working with us, who is part of the council and our group there in Powys. So I could see us working with the Green Party, for example. And that's a way to go, to be honest.
It's interesting you mention that, because I've got Green Alliance noted down, which was more in reference to the Richmond Park by-election. And we'll not discuss airport policy right now. But that is something that I find quite intriguing to hear a Liberal Democrat say, because there is a social liberalism, and there is absolutely no doubt that the policies being brought forward at the moment are very much in keeping with that. I know it's something that's important to you from your own speeches. Where does economic liberalism sit with the Liberal Democrats? Because the economic policies of the Green Party are read in a near-Soviet sense. They're a million miles away from any sort of idea of a liberal economic approach. I can see the role of social liberalism, but I'm looking, where's that sort of liberal approach to economics?
I think there's quite a few angles on that. And I think they're all embedded in shared prosperity. They're all embedded in how we look at a society where people share the wealth and share the economic values that are generated within our businesses and within our economy. And I think if we look at the match of those, I think they're completely and utterly, they come completely and utterly together. There is no difference for me between having a socially just society and an economically just society. So if I give you an example, I'm a big fan of universal basic income. It's not party policy. In fact, on the national level, it's been hit back as a policy for us to adopt. But it is something that I think is about us making sure we have a different society where we allow people to look at their own contribution to our communities, be that in caring, be that in an economic business sense, or be that in an entrepreneurship. I also want to work on how we measure our output, if you like. We're always talking about GDP and we're always talking about money and finances. Why don't we look at things like, are we free from mental health issues? Do we have a socially just society?
I appreciate this, but those services need paying for. And I mean, it struck me that there seems to be a blind spot on the economy. The document, A Liberal Wales, which was published this year, talks about a blueprint for a socially liberal Wales, but again, no reference to an economically liberal Wales. Where it does mention the economy, it refers to it as being built on diversity and creativity. It sounds nice, but I'm not sure what that means. And actually, even when you get to the stage of the spokespeople for the Welsh Liberal Democrats, you've got 7, one's got a slight asterisk because it's Kirsty Williams covering education. Obviously, it's a slightly different role as she's the Cabinet Secretary. But in addition to that, there are 6 others covering agriculture, environment, rural affairs, health, housing and electoral reform. Is it really credible not to have finance and economy spokespeople?
I think finance and economy cuts across all of those, and we can see that within them they actually span how we can look at a different society. So let me pick up one thing that you've just said there. You've talked about how we want to build up a society that is about being much more progressive, much more about being technologically sound. I think we need a different vision. We need a vision for Wales that is about us saying that we are going to be totally not dependent, but growing our economy in a different way. And being much more creative. So I do want to go back to universal basic income, as you did interrupt me. I want to talk about how that would be funded. I don't have all of the facts and figures. I want us to look at a pilot and I want us to research it. But we could be funding that through a carbon dividend. We could be funding that through carbon pricing, for example. We could be looking at how we are matching together, how we want our society to change in a local way, but also in an environmental way, so that we have the two coming together that says, we want you to be free, we want you to have an individual life where you can make the choices that you want, which is all about liberalism. And we will do this by making sure that those who pollute our atmosphere the most pay for it. Now, you will perhaps come back to me and says, well, as we decarbonise, as we reduce that, of course, we will lose that. I think that will go along with people being more creative, people actually generating income. And I also want us to go along with taxing wealth, taxing property, taxing inheritance. Inheritance is one of the most illiberal means by which our young people in particular are disadvantaged. So if you've got an inheritance, or if you've got a position in your community where you're lucky enough to have parents, grandparents who have left you wealth or are leaving you wealth, you're in a much better position to those who do not.
But that's very important to those families, that they are able to pass that on.
It is, but it's about us making sure we've got that society where we are able to share that prosperity. And let me just give you one example of that. If you own a property somewhere in perhaps Cardiff, which over the past 20, 30 years has benefited from better road transport, better schools, a better community, you should have to put something back into the economy to say, I recognise that I am gaining economically through the benefits that have been brought to me. The people who live in other places don't have that. And we want to balance that out. We want to say we cannot continue to have this totally unjust society where the rich, and we know this is indisputable, the rich get much richer and the poor don't get a lot poorer, but don't move from where they are. And that's been shown in the past 30 years since Thatcherism. We can see that now the rich are getting richer.
There is a difficulty in soaking the rich in Wales, because when you start looking at it, there aren't that many of them, and those that there are already paying high rates of taxation. I'm struggling. It's very difficult for us to obviously start pinning down what sort of level of tax you're looking at in this, because it would become a very theoretical conversation. But it is sounding far more of a high tax economy than I would have expected from a Liberal Democrat, if I'm completely honest.
Tax is not devolved, so tax is about a parliamentary responsibility. And let's take this back to Parliament, because Wales gets a very poor settlement from the Conservative government. And I'll be honest, we've never done well in Wales in shouting about Wales and how we demand better. Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, she's in the news virtually every day, to be honest. And if you asked an English person who Nicola Sturgeon was, they would know. You ask an English person who Carwyn Jones is, and they'd struggle. We never have been good, and Labour has never been good in Wales at shouting about what Welsh people need, what we need from the Westminster government. And also, don't forget that Wales has a much, much bigger border than Scotland. We make use of English services. Where I live in Welshpool, I have to go to an English hospital, and straight away we're into totally different arenas in terms of an imbalance there. We have to wait longer in Wales if you're a Welsh patient going to an English hospital. We have to do better. We have to say the Westminster Parliament has to give us more money, and that has to be part of the wider picture of the tax income and the income in general that comes into Westminster.
We are going to take a break to play the first of your chosen songs. We like to give our guests the opportunity to pick the songs, so we will. We've got Laddie Sifri to start with.
Something inside so strong.
You are listening to the Gwent Report on Gwent Radio. I am here with Jane Dodds, the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. And that was the first of her song choices. And I'm just going to mention, whatever you make of the politics of this hour, I've not had a guest yet who has put so much attention into selecting the right song choices. A few updates came through. I like how seriously people are taking this, but Jane is at the top of that list at the moment for people taking it very seriously. And I'm also very grateful because she's travelled a considerable distance to be with us here in our studio in Newport today. So, Jane, you mentioned that you were previously a member of the Labour Party, and we kind of skimmed over it. I think we should go back and we should discuss a little bit more about your background in what first got you into politics and what motivates you and what led to you moving. You mentioned the Iraq War, obviously, but what led you moving from the Labour Party to the Lib Dems?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my background is, and I think this is the same for everybody, isn't it? Kind of qualifies what your values are in relation to the way you live your life and your identity and your politics, either with a big P or a small p. So just very quickly, I was brought up in a Welsh Presbyterian household, Welsh speaking, went to Welsh schools, and our faith, being a Christian, was very important to us as a family. I became a social worker because I felt it was very important that I put something into society. I had this kind of view that I had been very, very lucky, and I had many privileges. I wasn't brought up in a particularly rich household. We were sort of fairly middle class, to be honest. And I'm still a child protection social worker, and I feel that the values of social justice and having a more equal society are important to me, and that goes along in terms of my faith. I was fascinated by liberation theology, which I don't know if you remember, was about the...
I think it's very kind of you to suggest I might remember it, to be honest. I think I might need to be educated on liberation theology.
Liberation theology was, and still is to a certain extent, about how faith, particularly in the Catholic Church, should be around serving and representing the local communities. And certainly in places like South America and Central America, many people suffered terribly for that. Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was in El Salvador, was killed. I think he's been recently made a saint. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of work in South American politics. I was the chair of the local Chile Solidarity campaign. I was very involved in Central American politics at the time of the Sandinistas and Nicaragua and the Contras. And that really led me to a place where I felt that I was left-wing, if you see what I mean. That is, for me, left-wing is about fighting privilege and power and being, using sort of policies and practice in order to challenge that in every way. So that's where I started, and it's right, I did become a member of the Labour Party. In fact, I campaigned for the Labour Party as well. I did a degree at Manchester and was very active there in terms of campaigning. And then Tony Blair obviously got into power, and we thought, yes, it's wonderful. This is exactly what we want. And I have to give credit to some of the things that he did. He really did support education. I was working with refugees in relation to my child protection and childcare practice, and a lot of funding and support went into that. But when the Iraq war came and when that was pushed through, I could no longer be a member of the Labour Party. I went on the big Iraq war demonstration, and that evening, I think it was, I resigned from the Labour Party. And I could not continue supporting Labour after that. And then when all of the issues came out around weapons of mass destruction and what presumably was was not the truth, I felt I couldn't go back either. I'm
interested to pick up on the reference to the role that faith plays in your political perspective. Clearly that was an issue which Tim Farron, the former Lib Dem leader, I think, at least in a public sense, struggled to balance his personal beliefs with a sense of liberalism as leader of a liberal party. I just wonder what your perspective is on that balance. It needn't necessarily be that specific circumstances.
I think it's always a difficult one. I just take comfort from the fact that I know the Liberal Democrats as a party are pardon the pun, a broad church. And indeed, when Tim Farron was facing all of the issues he was, many people came out in support of his right to say what he felt was important to him and to believe what he felt was important in terms of his beliefs. People who were atheists in the party, quite prominent people, expressed support to him to be able to say and believe what he had to say. The balance for me is that that must never be offensive. That must never be about condemning or judging a group of people or part of our party. And that Tim never did that. And we must always fight for everybody. And again, Tim always did that, as do many people, be they Christians, people of faith, people of no faith. We are here to serve a broad population, a broad party in terms of the beliefs that people come in with, and to respect them totally. And I think if it crosses the line, it becomes disrespectful, then there is a difference for me. That is illiberal and that is not acceptable.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. I appreciate the party comes first. You're the leader of the party always comes first. But what are your own personal ambitions? I mean, you fought a couple of elections now in Montgomeryshire, which was once a Liberal seat but has been a Liberal Conservative battleground for some time either way. But it tends not to be that close. It tends to be whichever one's got it has got it with a certain amount of comfort. So it's a bit of a battle on your hands, clearly, in those elections. Where do you see yourself? And is the motivation the Senedd or is the motivation Westminster?
So just to qualify one thing you said the party comes first. So it doesn't really for me. What comes first for me is being able to change society. So for me, Wales comes first, my community comes first, my local area comes first. That's the most important thing for me, and the vehicle I hope that I can do that is through being a member and the leader of the Welsh Lib Democrats. I don't really think much about what the future in terms of ambition means. Of course, you're absolutely right. I was the parliamentary candidate for Montgomeryshire. I've been that twice. I've been the candidate for the Welsh Assembly once as well. We don't have elections. I don't think we have elections anyway for another 3 to 5 years. Who knows? I will be putting myself forward for whatever the party, for whatever I think is right to be able to serve my community. I'll own that I'm much more interested in how we operate as a country. That means in terms of the UK, particularly how we place ourselves as internationalists, and how we can, dare I bring in Brexit and Europe, but how we place ourselves in that agenda as well. And as you know, tomorrow we have a huge march in London. We've got a lot of people going up from Wales to that. And that overrides everything for me. Staying in Europe is above and beyond any party politics, any membership of any party. If there was a UKIP member who wanted to walk alongside me in that march, I would be with that person.
It would be a fascinating conversation to have with them as well, wouldn't it?
It definitely would be.
Okay. That's thrown me. The idea of the UKIP on the march has just completely thrown me. I was up in London when there was I'm not sure whether it was the last one, but a fairly major march, and I have to say the scale of it was impressive. It wasn't ideal for when you wanted to cross the road, which is what I wanted to do, but nonetheless. You did talk about elections in the future. We have one election coming up in 2020, which is for police and crime commissioners. Thus far, the Liberal Democrats have not partaken in them in Wales. Is that likely to change?
That's not true, I'm afraid. In fact, a colleague of mine from Montgomeryshire, Richard Church, stood to be the Police and Crime Commissioner for Dyfed Powys in the last elections. But no, we continue. It's really important to us that we put ourselves forward for all our elections. We are a party that makes sure that everybody, the electorate, has the choice. And we have that in our sights. You'd be right to say that we haven't chosen our Police and Crime Commissioner candidates just yet, but we will be doing that soon. And
I stand corrected on the point of contesting it. You didn't contest the inaugural ones, and there wasn't a Liberal candidate in Gwent last time, but I stand corrected that there was elsewhere in Wales. And what do you see as the sort of realistic route back into... I mean, obviously, Kirsty Williams is playing a big role in the Assembly, but for other Lib Dems looking at the Assembly and looking at getting Lib Dems elected to Parliament again, I mean, for so long, Wales was a key component of the Liberal representation in Parliament. I mean, it was quite a milestone moment when Ceredigion changed hands in 2017. So what's the core route back, do you think?
I think that's an excellent question as well. So we've thought a lot about this, and this again we feel is about what's right for Wales. On the Senedd side, on the Cynulliad side, very clearly we have an aim of winning the regional seats as well as keeping Brecon and Radnorshire through Kirsty Williams. We lost the regional seats last time because of UKIP and because of the the campaign that they ran, which was very xenophobic. My Welsh Assembly representative is Neil Hamilton, who doesn't even live, I understand, in Wales. So we are looking very positively at being able to win those 5 regional seats back and the list seats back. We're absolutely going to keep Brecon and Radnorshire. So that's the Cynulliad, the Senedd. In terms of parliamentary seats, we are looking at the 3 parliamentary seats in Mid Wales, which we have held until very recently. That's Montgomeryshire, Ceredigion and Brecon and Radnorshire. We're being realistic. We're going to be working hard as we always do. I also want to mention the importance of the council elections. We have people working at the grassroots and we tend to forget about them, but they are working hard to talk about what the Liberal Democrats can do for our local communities. We've always been a party of pavement politics. We've always been a party that's worked for our local communities. We'll continue to do that. I'm not complacent. I'm not here for the short term. I'm here for the long game. And that's what it's all about. We have to demonstrate and show that we are here to do everything we can to improve lives in our communities in Wales for now and for the future.
We will have a little bit of a chat about that pavement politics after the next song. This is one of your choices as well. Would you like to explain to me why I'm about to play Crazy Horses by the Osmonds?
Sure. Well, every song I've chosen is a song that I can sing aloud to in the car. Which is where I get time alone, to be honest, when I'm driving around Wales. I just turn up the volume, and every single one of the choices I've made, including this one, is one that I can turn up the volume to. This song is by a group that, as a teenager, I adored. I was a big Osmonds fan. I could tell you their names, their middle names, their dates of birth. Was about air pollution, and for me it was the first song about how we must address climate change, and that's another reason that it was important to me.
I have to confess, there are lots of songs where the meaning has gone over my head and I've heard them a few years later and thought about them and realised they meant something completely different, and it was probably highly inappropriate for me to play them in front of my parents. That was about climate change is news to me, I have to say, but there you go. It's good to have a message in these things. We talked a little bit about pavement politics. In fact, you mentioned the topic beforehand. And this is something that the Lib Dems are tremendously good at. I've been involved in politics enough to see how effective a group of Lib Dems are at getting their message out. I don't always entirely correlate it with my experience of chatting to Liberal Democrat activists who, and in all honesty, have some of the best policy brains I've ever had. I have fantastic conversations with Liberal Democrat friends. But then I see the campaigns on the ground and this sort of big liberal vision seems to have dissipated, and it's a very reactionary campaign to whatever the big local issue of the time is. So how can you ensure a consistency? On something like housing, for example, you mentioned it was a priority earlier on. How can we get that consistency? It's not only the Lib Dems who have this issue, I will note, by the way. But how do you get that consistency between the need for significant building in every Welsh local authority with the fact that one of the best ways to win votes at a local election is to oppose the new development down the road?
I always say you have to do the right thing, and the right thing sometimes doesn't make you popular. I've only been leader for just less than a year, and there were 3 things that I said that we had to do in everything: campaigning, leaflets, knocking on doors, and they are these 3 things. Firstly, if it doesn't excite, inspire and surprise us, don't do it, because it's not going to do that for anybody else. Secondly, it has to be distinctively Welsh. And thirdly, it has to go above the other parties. And by that I mean, I don't want policies and positions that are about being critical about everybody else. I think we're all fed up of saying the opposite to whatever somebody else says. So if Labour say the sky is blue, we might say it's red. It is absolutely not helping anybody if we just operate on a position of being negative about what the other parties say. We have to have a vision. The example you gave of affordable housing, I would want us to think that if we believed that a development was right, that it provided more affordable housing, and it was built in a place where we had lots of voters and they all pleaded with us not to support it, I would like us to think that we would do the right thing and support it. And I haven't had any conversations of that nature with anybody as yet in Wales, being a leader. And I don't know of any examples, but that's the way I think we should operate, that we have to do the right thing. People remember that we've done the right thing, even if we might not get voted in either personally or as a party the next time. We must do the right thing for the people we're there to represent, which aren't just the people who are voting for us now, but the people who might vote for us in the future and for our communities and our societies.
I have to say, I think that's quite a refreshing approach, and I think that's a very constructive approach. It's not always been the case that that's taken place. I have here a copy of, an anonymous copy before anybody tries to get me on GDPR or something, of a survey which was put out in 2016. So it was before you became leader of the Welsh Lib Dems. Now this was put out in the Cullinan ward in Newport. And it's designed very much to look like a Labour leaflet. The Labour Party, I will wave it broadly in front of the webcam. The Labour Party in Cullinan raised, I'm going to say they raised a complaint. They might have just gone to the press, to be honest. I'm not sure either way. It ended up in the press. It was a matter of some controversy. It's the most over-the-top version I've seen. It is not an entirely isolated case I've seen where literature put out, particularly in by-elections by Liberal Democrats, has been quite the opposite of what you just described. And indeed there was, if we go back a few years earlier, there was the campaign manual that circulated which encouraged people to let me get the words right because I don't want to get this bit wrong. Be wicked, act shamelessly, stir endlessly, don't be afraid to exaggerate. Positive campaigning will not be enough to win control of the council. Oppose all service cuts. No cut is going to be popular, and why court the unpopularity that goes with the responsibility of power? Are you telling me from what you've just put forward that we're not going to see that of any significant scale going forward with the Welsh Liberal Democrats?
If I know about it in the time that I'm leader, I will challenge it.
Yeah, I appreciate that you can't be held accountable for every single leaflet that goes out, but you're keen that that's not the approach the party takes in the future.
That's correct.
I think that's a very good, clear answer to have. Thank you. I finally want to just touch on the mythical centrist party. I was going to touch on this earlier on, but you referenced your own left-wing leanings, which maybe made me pause on this one for a moment while I thought about it. Very senior Liberal Democrats have talked up a new centrist party or a new centrist movement, in fairness, which is slightly different. Paddy Ashdown referred to it not being the time for the centre to be tribal, and if modern moderates can find their voice, and he likened it to En Marche in France, we have to be part of that. I think Nick Clegg described something which he would not be part of and the Lib Dems would still be distinct from but could potentially work with, which was a very diplomatic way of putting it. Isn't the centre ground something the Lib Dems should be owning at a time when Labour have lurched to the left, the Conservatives are creeping to the right? We keep hearing this talk about new centrist parties emerging and they seem to disappear almost as quickly as they come out. The search for a British Macron remains elusive. Why aren't the Lib Dems just the natural party of the centre?
I I actually think we are. For me, politics is about the heart. It's not necessarily about the head. It's about a passion, a feeling that you have that is where your values lie. And I am clear that we are the party who are not extreme left, we're not extreme right. But having said all of that, if you knock on a door of somebody and say, do you know what's left wing? Do you know what's right wing? Do you know what's centrist? I think most people would say, no, I don't, and I'm not bothered. I just want to know how you're going to be able to help me. And that's where we need to put ourselves. If people want to join us, fabulous. That's great. Come on in. I've opened out the invitation to many people, particularly people in Wales of the Labour Party who are pro-EU. I'll be honest and say I cannot in any way understand the position of the Labour Party on Brexit. I haven't a clue what they believe and what they think. And people like Owen Smith, I think, are incredibly brave and are standing there and are saying, you know what, I want to support Europe. So people like Owen Smith, come and join the Liberal Democrats. People like Anna Soubry, come and join the Liberal Democrats. We are your natural home. We are the people who will represent your views. If you want to be an internationalist, if you want to be passionate about social justice, if you want to be pro-European, if you want to look at shared prosperity in our communities and our societies, it's the Liberal Democrats.
We are building to a climax there, aren't we? I think it felt like a party political for a second. Would you like to introduce the final song? Because I can't believe we're gonna finish on a more upbeat note than that. We might. Could I ask you one question? Have you enjoyed being interviewed by the Gwent Report?
Of course I have. It's been a real different experience. You know, you go along to programmes and you think, oh gosh, I've got to use my brain and be careful about what I say and not relax. And I've really enjoyed this. It's been really relaxing and refreshing. So thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce your final song? My
final song is Oh Happy Day, and there are two reasons this is why I've chosen this. One is that it was played at my wedding, so this is a tribute to my husband Patrick, who's put up with politics and everything for the past X number of years. And secondly, for me, it's about Christianity and about my faith, which is probably the deepest thing that I hold dear.